episode 21 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. If you're joining me on my YouTube channel, don't forget to click like, smash that subscriber bell, or if you're joining me on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, don't forget to click like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, of course. So you see I have another little knick-knack on the desk, and as you previously come to, most of the things in this office here are not just accidentally placed. This is the only VHS tape that I still own, and probably can't read it, but this is, I believe, the greatest movie of its kind ever made. A true crime documentary, which came out more than 35 years ago, created and directed by a man by the name of Errol Morris, who would later go on to win an Oscar for an exploration into, among other things, the Vietnam War and the Korean War, called The Fog of War. And Errol Morris is a Long Island native, grew up in the Five Towns, Hewlett to be precise, one town over from Woodmere, and I hazard a guess that at some point in Errol Morris's younger days, he ventured into Woodmere bowling lanes and probably bowled there. And my grandfather maybe didn't know him by name, but, oh yeah, that's that kid, he comes in. You know, he always had a story for everybody that he remembered that used to come into the bowling alley. But Errol Morris, Long Island native from Hewlett. And my first experience with this film was at New York University in a kind of an iconic class because of who the professor was. Robert Sklar, the late Robert Sklar, was a successful author. He had written for the Los Angeles Times. And, back then, we didn't have this. And information existed, but you had to really know where to go to find it. You couldn't just randomly happen upon it. The internet was there, but it was nothing like now. And watching this film in that class, I was, no exaggeration, blown away. And before I get into the mechanics of what the movie's ultimate end result was, Errol Morris had made a documentary called Gates of Heaven, and it dealt with pet cemeteries and a crazy conspiracy to defraud people who paid to have their pets buried properly. Not like the Stephen King movie, but in a more serious way. And there's another story attached to that particular movie, which I can't get into because that'll be another podcast, another crazy true story. But Errol Morris had made a film called Vernon, Florida, and he had made Gates of Heaven, and he was looking to do something else in the kind of what would now be known as true crime arena. And he was doing a lot of different kinds of research, and he fixated on a doctor who worked for the Dallas County Police Department named Greekson. And he was the, I believe, psychiatrist, not psychologist, but he was the person who would speak to condemned inmates and was supposed to render his opinion as to whether this person was even redeemable enough where we don't need to execute them. They can actually live out a life sentence, and we can, do it that way. Even in Dallas of the at the time, like 1970s into the 80s. This guy Greekson, his nickname was Dr. Death. And some of you wrestling fans remember there was a wrestler named Dr. Death, Steve Williams, but Morris apparently became intrigued at this. Why do they call him Dr. Death? Well, they called him Dr. Death because at least up until the point of time that this movie takes us, every condemned inmate that he interviewed, he rendered a verdict, more or less, we have to kill him. Every single person that he spoke with, his verdict was, yeah, he's too far gone, it's too risky, or whatever it was, but hence, Dr. Death. So Errol Morris began preparing to make a movie about this Dr. Death, and as he did his research, and very, very thorough. I mean, Errol Morris research is like very few others in that field. He really buckles down and will do whatever it takes, again, even more than 35 years ago, to get what he needed. So while he was interviewing gentlemen who were on death row in the Dallas County prison system, he met a man by the name of Randall Adams, who had also said, we have to kill this Adams guy, we have to get rid of this guy. And so he was only interviewing Randall Adams for his soon-to-be documentary on Dr. Greekson. He asked Adams a whole bunch of questions, mostly about the situation with Greekson, but Adams also pointed out, well, I kind of got railroaded. I know the kid who killed that police officer, Officer Wood. It wasn't me, but I kind of got screwed, got railroaded. Now, Shawshank Redemption makes light of the fact that every man's innocent. So Randall Adams simply telling a filmmaker who was only there to interview him as like background for his actual documentary. Errol Morris didn't believe him, but there was something about the way that Adams was talking and the way that he was recounting this kind of matter of fact, where he had sort of almost become immune to, I got fucked, that's it, I'm gonna die, and there's nothing we can do about it. Morris was intrigued and began backpedaling away from the proposed documentary on Greekson. And the more he looked into the Randall Adams case, the more convinced he became that Randall Adams had in fact been railroaded, that he was not the killer, and he probably was not even there when the killing happened. He simply got screwed by a system that saw him as a random drifter. He was in his late 20s, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So Errol Morris changed his focus on the fly and made this movie, The Thin Blue Line, which is, it's a documentary, but it did not get nominated for the Academy Award for Best Documentary, despite incredible rave reviews. You know, even like Siskel and Ebert you see on this box, not that you can, but they thought it was one of the greatest that they had ever seen, for sure. It was a nonfiction film, is how it was described, and there was something in the language with the Academy Awards that because that it was not listed as a documentary, it couldn't be. It's total absurdity. It should have won, let alone be nominated. It ended up winning a ton of major awards, but I don't want to skip to the end. He started to interview people who had testified in the Randall Adams murder case. The police officer's name is Robert Wood, who was killed. And what Errol Morris decided to do was, at the time, it had not been done before. It's not a straightforward talking head documentary with a lot of fancy editing. Errol Morris recreates the murder over and over, depending on who's telling the story and who the killer is, if they even have any idea who the killer is. And the more that he worked, the more convinced he became, obviously, that Randall Adams was innocent. And so he's making the movie, and as he's interviewing all these people and doing all of these recreations, he finishes the film, and the film is released. And as I say, the critical reaction is off the charts. People can't believe it. This is incredible. Now, I don't believe that Randall Adams had a particular, sorry to be ghastly, he did not have an execution date, but he was on death row. And the movie does not exactly tell us for certain who the killer is. A little bit like Zodiac, where you're pretty sure you know who the Zodiac killer was, at least based on David Fincher's film and what we see. It wasn't proven. In the world of this movie, we are pretty sure we know what happened. But the movie kind of stopped short of saying, this is exactly what happened. So the movie comes out, critical acclaim, and it's so persuasive that Dallas County reopens the case, and Randall Adams' murder conviction is overturned and he's freed. When people talk about the power of motion pictures, that they're not just for entertainment, it's movies like this that got people talking about the death penalty, whether you're for it or against it. This was literally a situation where the death penalty, I mean, if they had set a date, they could have executed this guy and nobody would have known that he was innocent. Nobody would have given a shit. They wouldn't have cared. It took one filmmaker asking a lot of questions to realize, oh my God, what a gross miscarriage of justice that we're about to be party to. Instead, it would have been nothing. This would never have been reported again. Randall Adams would have been executed, and the actual killer of Officer Wood would not have been found. Would never have had to face justice in any way, even if it was just the court of public opinion. So as I was saying earlier, this film won a number of Best Feature awards at various film festivals, even overseas, not just Best Documentary. And in 2001, it was added to, and this is very prestigious, what is known as the National Film Registry. The Library of Congress selects certain films each year that have artistic or historical merit or importance for specific preservation, meaning the original negative is going to be preserved, for all time. That's the theory, anyway. So I remember when I watched this movie the first time, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this could have happened. And we've had so many instances. This is 1995 that my 21-year-old, self is in shock that this could have taken place. I had the same reaction when in the same class we watched The Times of Harvey Milk, and I couldn't believe that. Wait a minute, they assassinated Harvey Milk, and the guy didn't fry. He didn't get convicted of murder. What? You kind of realize these things at different points, that justice can be completely deaf, dumb, and blind. And this was such a gross miscarriage of justice that it's good that they finally got it right, but it shouldn't have reached that point. So, as I say, Errol Morris went on to, many years later, 15 plus years later, in fact, to win an Oscar for Best Documentary. And he kind of joked around that year at the Oscars that, oh, I guess you finally like my films. And there was laughter because people who knew his work knew this guy should have won already. One of the other ironies, if you want to use the word ironies, is some of you who might be familiar with Morris's work. When I said Dr. Death, you were like, well, wait a minute, didn't he make a movie about that guy? After all, he didn't. He had a different film called Mr. Death. And Mr. Death was about a man named Fred Lucher Jr., who was a man who built humane execution machines for states that had the death penalty. And so he was called Mr. Death. And the doctor from this movie, oh, and I should point out that Gregson does appear in The Thin Blue Line. Because, and then they get into this whole thing where this guy talked to me for 30 seconds and he said I was beyond help and needed to be executed. That's in the film. So yeah, that is pretty much all there is to say about this movie and about my experience with it, of just being completely blown away by a nonfiction documentary film the first time. Because I used to think, they're boring. They're not interesting. That class showed me that I was completely wrong. Paris is Burning, the precursor to RuPaul's Drag Race. Watched it in that class too. That's a movie set in, it came out in 91, but it's supposed to be, it was filmed a little bit before that, about masquerade balls, drag race type contests in the Harlem and other areas of Manhattan, from the mid-'80s until 1990. And that was another incredible documentary that I got to see because I was in this class. So if you're interested in seeing The Thin Blue Line, it is streaming free on the Tubi channel, Tubi. That is an app that you can get on your phone or your tablet or your TV. It's a regular streaming channel like all of them. There are ads. I don't think that there is a subscription tier. I could be wrong. This movie is worth a few ads. If you like true crime, and we know so many people are into it, you know, whether it was like the Ted Bundy documentary or the Gacy documentary, or that awful, horrifying Girl in the Picture, which is also one of my top 5. You know, if you said, what are your top 5 documentaries? Girl in the Picture, not in any order, Thin Blue Line, Times of Harvey Milk, Capturing the Freedmans. Those are 4 that are just unbelievable. And Spellbound is pretty good, about the National Spelling Bee for kids. But I have liked an awful lot of documentaries. Wild Man Blues was terrific. I think it's also streaming on the AMC channel if you get, you know, American Movie Classics. And there are certain streaming services that bundle AMC with that. So if you have access to that channel, that will be, you know, ad-free. And Errol Morris is on the list of people that I really wish I, you know, that kind of a bucket list of people to meet. You know what? Since I was going to wrap this up sooner than expected, because I really got on a roll there, I'm going to tell you the story that I teased earlier about Errol Morris's film, Gates of Heaven, about the pet cemeteries that were an unbelievable scandal. Like, not a scandal that anybody would ever expect. So, he met the great filmmaker and actor, he's been in a number of Hollywood productions, Werner Herzog, who was considered to be pretty bent, like doing crazy shit on various movies, which I can't get into that. That's 2 podcasts. His up and down relationship with Klaus Kinski, the actor, each guy threatening to kill the other, I don't even know how many different times. But Werner Herzog is a very serious, very sober type of a personality, young or now. And he's, if you remember the first Jack Reacher movie with Tom Cruise, he is like, what was his name? The Zek. You keep hearing about this guy, the Zek. Oh my God, the Zek, the Zek, the Zek. And the Zek is played by Werner Herzog, and he is scary as fuck. Holy crap, is he scary. Best thing in the movie next to, you know, Cruise. The Zek, Werner Herzog. So Errol Morris, very young, in the late 70s, I believe, met Werner Herzog. I want to say he met him at a film festival, but I'm not sure the mechanics of it. I didn't read that part. But he told Herzog about this documentary that he was going to try to make about pet cemeteries. And Werner Herzog, God bless Werner Herzog, what a guy, what an extraordinary guy. He told Errol Morris, you won't get that film made. I appreciate your effort, kid. You're not ever going to get it made. But if I'm wrong, and I'm not going to be wrong, but if I'm wrong, I promise you, we will handshake. I'll eat my shoe. That is how sure that I am that you are never going to get this film off the ground. You have no means to finance, and nobody is going to give you a dime. I'll give you a dime. Here you go. He gave him a couple of, it was like a 20 or something. Errol Morris got that film made, and Werner Herzog, true to his word, took off one of his shoes, and in front of the cameras, he seasoned it, he basted it, he sauteed it in garlic, in oil. He had some tomatoes, basil. I am not joking about any of this. The movie is called Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. And it is just as absurd and fucking hilarious as the title. But it is about Werner Herzog losing a bet to the guy who would go on to make this extraordinary film, The Thin Blue Line, and would later win an Oscar for The Fog of War, where his subject in that film was the former Secretary of Defense and a very well-respected, despite the catastrophic mistakes made in Vietnam, but Robert McNamara, who was well into his 80s, but in that film, his command of history, like the accuracy of his words, you know, he basically was falling on his sword for most of that film. And it's a great movie. Like, it didn't win. This wasn't one, well, we have to give Morris Best Documentary because we kind of owe him. No, he earned it. He earned it. But yeah, Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. It would be a nice companion piece to this to kind of lighten the mood, because this movie will enrage you. And many of us, have seen, whether it's true crime or other kind of reality stuff, we see things that they make us so angry we can't believe that this is possible. And this movie, when you get into it and you kind of start to unpack all of the interviews that Morris did with various people, they all knew, and they were willing to let this man, Randall Adams, die just because. No one will miss him. That is horrifying. And Randall Adams, one of the great quotes from this documentary is, I think it's actually pretty early in the docu, where he said, if anybody asks me to define hell on earth, Dallas County. Hopefully it's a little bit different, nowadays, but you can understand, because the guy got screwed, and then he just kept getting screwed until somebody just came in and rescued him, almost literally, just because he happened to be interviewing him for a different film which didn't get made. So that now, and I'm sorry for running on, but that story with Werner Herzog is just too good not to tell. That brings to a conclusion episode 21 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you for joining me for about 75% The Thin Blue Line, and the rest Gates of Heaven, and the amazing Werner Herzog, and a really brilliant filmmaker in Errol Morris. I'm a Michael Moore scholar. I love Roger and Me, his least political film. But Morris does it from a different angle, and I would say that nobody does it better than Errol Morris. No one has mastered the form to the extent that this man. Hewlett native, Long Island, 5 towns native, Errol Morris, Oscar winner for The Fog of War. So if you joining me on my YouTube channel, please don't forget to click like, smash that subscriber bell. And if you're listening to the audio version, whether iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio, please, if you like the content, click like and click subscribe. I will see you all again real soon for episode 22. Peace.